the blip, the engraver's role in Tenniel's process. Let's get right in on it. In the 1800s, there were two types of wood engraving. There was white line and there was facsimile. Tenniel practiced facsimile. In white line, the engraver began with a wash drawing on the wood, as you see here. In facsimile, he began with a line drawing on the wood. In white line, the engraver interpreted these grays as he wished. In facsimile, the engraver cut in facsimile. He cut around the lines. In white line, well, it expresses engraving. What do I mean by that? Well, when you see a white line engraving, you kind of sense that knife, you know, that it's an actual wood cut. In facsimile, it really just imitates pen and ink drawing. In white line, they eschew cross-hatching. It's a lot of work. They don't really want to do all that. If the engraver decides to do this pattern, that's his choice. He decided to do that. In facsimile, it sort of glorifies in cross-hatching. Well, there was actually some critics of facsimile wood engraving. One of them was the chief critic of the day, John Ruskin. He said of the engraver's work, it was not really difficult. It was only tedious. Did a lot of math. And he was really obsessed with this cross-hatching business. Now calculate how many men are night and day cutting 1,050 square holes to the square inch as the occupation of their manly life. Okay, now he actually did some more math even. He says, let's draw 6 lines like this. Now draw 6 quicker lines like that, sloppy lines. He has 12 careless lines. And those 12 careless lines, from that, he demands from his engraver 250 precise cuts, okay? So 12 quickly drawn, careless lines, 250 precise cuts. He didn't see this as a fair relationship. He saw it as an ugly relationship. And therefore, it's not a good art form with this horrible relationship in there. He even related it to American slavery, for goodness sakes. Now, this type of analogy is insensitive to us today, but nonetheless, he made it. He saw it like we might look at an Indian rug today. You might see a beautiful Indian rug, but once you're told how that was produced and what kind of labor and what kind of conditions, that Indian rug isn't so beautiful. Henry Holiday, he thought the same thing. He said, unnatural imitation of scratchy cross-hatching, imitating the work of another art. It's imitating pen and ink drawing. He didn't like cross-hatching either, as though everything in nature consisted of fishing nets and cobwebs. He's a funny guy. A servile, there's that concept again, and very unsuccessful method of reproducing drawings. These guys were nothing compared to William James Linton, a very colorful character, as you can see, more colorful than the other two. These poor engravers, cutting as rats might gnaw, portions of something not understood by them, their business only to stick exactly to the lines. Two-legged cheap machines, he called engravers. By the way, he was an engraver. The engravers, well, who were they? Here's a picture of one of them. Well, they were often portrayed with a visor, an eyeglass, and a water globe that we already saw a water globe today. That's their main symbol.
I enjoyed it. How about you?
And I can hear somebody. They had a full set of tools, gravers, scorpers, tint tools, spit stickers. I love their names. And a stand and a leather bag. This picture we've seen already, haven't we? And here's an engraver. It was often said that one engraver could cut out a whole illustration. They didn't need all these funny tools. So there we have the lamp. The lamp shines its light into the water globe, which concentrates the light onto the block, which stood, it was couched in a bag, a leather bag, so they can easily twist the block around. And of course, on a stand. Here's, this is for making proofs, dabbing the ink in the, here. This is a burnisher, all the tools, sharpening stone here. They held the engraver in the palm of their hand like this, and they rested their thumb on the wood block here, and they pushed forward. So their thumb was giving support to the cut. If this were a drawing on the wood, we have to pretend this is on the wood, and they would cover it up with a piece of paper, and they glue it down the sides with beeswax, say. They'd rip off a corner, and they start cutting. Now, they would not cut one side of the line first completely. And then, because that, if they did that, when they're cutting the back side of the line, they would have weakened the wood. So what they do is they actually cut around the lines first, like this, okay? And then they cut out another section, they rip out another section of that paper, and they continue on. They keep on ripping it out until they, well, wait a second. Notice something not understood by them, what Linton said. See, they don't even know what they're cutting. They don't even see it. So sometimes they don't even know what they're just cutting around the lines. They could care less what it is. That's what Linton was getting at. And this is the first cutting. So they've cut around all the lines. And you can see in this cross hatching, he did, the engraver did cut it out as he went completely. But even down here, he didn't. He actually cut out those squares in the middle to gorge that out later. And even in this tighter cross hatching, he also just cut around the lines first. You know, that's very tedious work. So that's the first cutting. And then they could give it to a less talented engraver to gorge out the rest of it if they wanted. Here is the Jabberwock block, or the Jabber block. As you can see, this is British Library, British Museum. I get them confused. Library, right? The cutting can be rather shallow in places like his hair here or on his butt. But when there's more white space, the cutting had to be deeper because you wouldn't want that paper to get accidentally inked when printing. So they had to be cut deeper here. Sometimes they left a border on the drawings, the cutting. During the proofing stage. This was actually a proof sent to an artist, and he did make comments on the side, which I cut off. So they're protecting it. So if it gets dropped, it wouldn't get damaged. And I think I see that on Alice proofs. You can see these lines here. I think the proofer just caught a little bit of that protection. Usually don't see them. It's very rare to see. I've seen one or two like this. You can also see proofing mistakes, or cutting mistakes on proofs. There's this black spot there. That's a gorging mistake. They forgot to gorge that out, but they did. It never appeared in the book. That's on a proof. Accuracy and faithfulness. Well, I knew from what Ruskin was saying and others and what I was researching and finding that they were probably pretty accurate. And they were also probably pretty faithful to the drawing. But I didn't know how to prove it. So I decided to use my alpha sleep. You know, when you wake up in the morning, your brain is clear. And I remember waking up in the morning and thinking about this problem. How can I prove this? So I just had it in me that there was some way to prove it. And it immediately came to me. Tenniel stopped drawing on the wood at one point, right? And he started to draw on paper. And that was photographed onto the wood. And that was called process, photographing a drawing onto the wood. He started to do this in 1891. His colleagues were doing it decades before, so he was very late. So all they have to do is find one of these pen and ink drawings and compare it to the print. And I knew to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and sure enough, they had one. They only had one. And this is it. It was a very bad copy I got at first, but I paid £60 to get a good copy of it, a good DPI. I think it's 600 DPI. And here it is. And now I'm going to slowly or change it to the print. Well, that was fast. And I could actually blink them back and forth. I hope you're all using the biggest screen you can. You should minimize me or whatever. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take insignificant parts of the drawing to see how faithful they were. Of course, you're going to draw the nose, Gladstone's nose, you know, exactly as is. But what about these, you know, you can draw this background any such way. Are they faithful to what Tenniel did? I mean, I'm going to slowly change this to the print. I mean, the drawing, which has color. You see it's a little tan. You hardly saw any change. If I blink it back and forth, you'll see some change. Some of the change you see when I blink it is optics. All scanners and cameras, they distort a bit. If I line up all four corners, the middle might not line up, believe it or not. Let's take another insignificant part. And what's more insignificant than a man's nipple, I thought? No. Actually, I wanted this section because he's going for tone here, Tenniel. So did the engravers have to interpret his tone differently? Did they have to make those lines closer together or further apart to achieve what Tenniel's after? No. They cut around the lines, as you see here. You can see little changes. They don't amount to much. You can see that the engraver perhaps forgot to cut a little D, kind of went swooping over like this, but didn't make this a nice sharp cut. But all these, even in this area where there's just shading, all these shapes are represented. You know, he keeps them all. He just goes around the line. Now, some are different because it's very minute. We're talking about less than a millimeter here. And he's just, you know, if he misses a little bit, then he makes the other one just a little bit bigger to make up for it. But he's trying his best, I think, to be truthful to what Tenniel drew. He doesn't have any interest to change it or to comment on it in any way. And of course, here's some cross-hatching. We have to look at cross-hatching. I'm obsessed with cross-hatching like Mr. Ruskin. And you can see, I thought maybe, you know, they had a stamp where they, you know, pounded some cross-hatching in and then would fill it out or something. But no, they cut out each one of these quads. I forgot to mention that it takes about 10 strokes, Ruskin tells us, to cut out each one of these. And that's how we got those 250 precise cuts before. You can see that this cut is a little too deep, right? But no biggie. So some little mistakes. I actually want to drill down into one quad here, just to prove a point. Let's look at this one quad. There's a little blip coming in from the top. Notice the engraver kept it. He didn't look left, he didn't look right, make sure nobody's watching, and just cut, you know, excise the thing, get rid of the thing and make his life easier. No, he spent time cutting that stupid, insipid blip out. And he not only did that there, he did it in this square and in this quad up here. Notice there's a little scoopy shape here and a little scoopy shape here. So this is what Ruskin is getting at when he says, when he mocks them for their manly life, cutting out these stupid holes. That's what they did. If I take the drawing here and I slowly take the color around, I give it a little more contrast, we get the same thing. That's just using Photoshop to bring it equal to that. If I had to find a place where the engraver is intentionally trying to improve the drawing, do something, you know, adding to the art, I would say he did this. You can see some little blops here from Tenniel's pen. And there's kind of well, a mass of them here. And he took them out. The engraver did take them out. And he takes other little blops out and makes other little changes as you saw, but nothing really amounts to much. But this seems to be intentional. And this is the biggest change I can find that actually adds value to the illustrations say. I actually had proof of the engraver's accuracy on my bookshelf right over there, and didn't know it. One of these is the drawing for Henry Holliday's illustration here, and one is the proof, okay? Now I could go and I could blink them back and forth. You get tired of me doing this, but there, you can see they're the same. This was obviously processed.
His nose is different.
The nose was different, did someone say? Okay. I can't line up everything perfectly, believe me, I try. But there's optics and everything. But there's no way he squared this off, you know, and because I lost my train of thought here. The drawing is twice as large, almost twice as large as the proof, okay? Mm-hmm. Now I made them the same size here, but there's no way that he used squaring to, you know, make it smaller. No one would create that much trouble for themselves and so exactly, and do that 5-10 times over for all the illustrations. But you can see how similar they are. And I'm not even telling you which is which to prove a point about how accurate they were, right? That's how accurate they were. There is a way to tell if you know you're hunting of the snark. Also, Victorians took pictures of wood blocks before the engraver got to destroy the drawing. They took pictures of them a lot of times. And here's one of them. Here is the photo of the block before it was cut. And here's the proof. You have to be careful with this evidence because you can see that these lines on the neck here are just barely coming out. If something is just barely coming out, some lines are probably not coming out at all. So you have to be careful with this evidence. So I put this under here. And if I blink it back and forth, you can see the difference. But, you know, don't go say, oh, look what the engraver did. No. In fact, if you look at this section over here, I can't see it now because you're all blocking me. I didn't expect this difficulty. But if you see this section over here with all these lines, notice how they're all the same. The lines that are closer together are closer together. The lines that are further apart are further apart. The engraver kept exactly what the artist did, okay? Of course, you see movement, that's optic. Lewis Carroll himself actually owned pictures of wood blocks before they were cut. He owned them for Harry Furnace, Silver and Bruno, and for A Tangletail by Frost. And they were sold at the auction after his death. And they're now in Harvard. Harvard, though, they call them photomechanical prints. I think they're wrong. I think they're just regular photographs of the drawings on the wood. They just don't know what they are. Don't tell them. Keep it between us. Despite what I'm telling you here about the engraver's accuracy and their faithfulness to what the artist drew, there are some some scholars that want to lift those engravers up and put them on a pedestal. And the first I'm going to discuss here is Rodney Enkin, who wrote a biography of Tenniel called Sir John Tenniel, Alice's White Knight. He wrote, Tenniel provided shorthand drawings which suggest how little he needed to send to Swain to be sure of clear interpretations of his original idea. So he finds this drawing in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And he finds many like it, cartoon style. And he finds the print, and he declares that the difference between them is all the engraver's doing. Well, no. The engraver did not decide to put a hat on this guy or make his suit white and this guy's black suit. Okay, this bad dancer, this guy, right? He has 2 left feet. Is Tenniel giving him a choice? No. This is a misdefinition of what he's finding in the museum. He drew a nice finished drawing on the wood. Beth Ann Stevens wrote more recently an article in 2017 online called Wood Engraving as Ghostwriting. I'm sorry, but Beth Ann Stevens is a very nice person. She has helped me. But I have to be honest. Have to be honest. I disagree. My trouble with it begins with the title. Okay. She writes, I see the wood engraver as the artistic equivalent of the ghostwriter who is responsible for the entire texture and fabric of the text we read. I want to make it perfectly clear here. Tenniel's not the ghostwriter. Tenniel's the pretender. You have a ghostwriter, you have a person who pretends they can write. Tenniel is the pretender in this relationship, the one that doesn't have the talent. So enough said about that. Even the straightest lines have distinct qualities when magnified. I can give her that. This amounts to a whole different look, which is visible to the casual observer. I'm going to say that a whole different look is a bit of an exaggeration. And entire texture and fabric is also an exaggeration. And if it's visible to the casual observer, well, not one of her figures shows us that. I don't see it myself and I've looked at more than just the two I've shown you. In fact, in her article, the figures are attributed in this way. Figure 3, DL after John Tenniel. Okay. That's very pointed. That's a very pointed way to attribute this. DL did this after John Tenniel. To be honest, in Victorian times, they did write engravings by the DL brothers after designs by John Tenniel. This would be on the title page. But this short version of it today kind of irks me, I must admit. The DLs is a company, you know, several engravers may have cut this, and probably not even a DL. So this is by a corporation after John Tenniel. With facsimile wood engraving, I really don't, I'm not one that likes this after business, after John Tenniel. But it is a troublesome issue, I have to agree. Last one, Simon Cook. He wrote a book called Illustrated Periodicals of the 1860s. And he has a chapter in the book about the artist and the engraver, their relationship. He writes, engraving was often, he agrees with Bethan Stevens, basically. Engraving was often a matter of imaginative interpretation of improving, changing, enhancing aspects of the original work. Okay. He has the habit, though, of bringing up a drawing like this and comparing it to the final print he finds. Now, it's my belief that the engraver never saw this. This was in the studio, the artist's studio, when the engraver was cutting this out on the block. I don't know why he's comparing the two. He writes, working from Hunt's design, which he says is this, the engraver has made his own reading, which he says,
No way.
The printed illustration is little more than a semblance of the original drawing.
This piece on the block to be destroyed.
Well, and he says the original drawing is this, you know. This drawing is a fine drawing, and, you know, it has a vanishing point here, you know. An engraver cannot just cut out circles from nothing, you know. You don't work on an engraving for 4 hours and then just wing some circles. It's not like painting or drawing where you can, you know, once you make a cut, you're doomed. That's your cut, you know. Frederick Sandys, Amor Mundi. This is a poem by Christina Rossetti, the third friend of Lewis Carroll I'm bringing up, actually. So Cook says this drawing was photographed onto the wood. And this is the illustration as printed in the magazine. Now, I must admit they look very similar, but you can tell them apart by this tree in the front, okay? So Cook says the darker tone here is all the engraver, the hair being darker is the engraver's doing, the modeling on the cheek, you can see the shadowing on the cheek is the engraver's doing, it's not here, the engraver added it. In fact, if we actually take a section of this and we blow it up, and I'm going to turn this around. you can see that is totally different. Look, there's leaves here. There's reeds under your pictures I can't see anymore. And, you know, there's no way that the engraver just carved out these leaves from these reeds when these leaves were there on the block. Okay, engraving wasn't like that. You just can't freely cut. Engraving wasn't like that bird in Fred Flintstone's camera. You know, you had to cut around the lines. Okay, it's intensely risky to do anything without doing that. Even the simplest design. Look at this tree coming in here. And of course this was not. I actually thought I had to make a big argument why that wasn't photographed on the block, but I don't. If you go to the Hartley collection in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, they actually have this. This says photograph of a drawing of the drawing on block before engraving. And it's the one, of course, with the tree in the front. So he has a faulty methodology, okay? And that allows him to make this other conclusion, another conclusion-like statement. Placed in a position of extraordinary power, engravers were responsible for converting the illustrator's work from its original form as a drawing on paper into a graphic representation. I'm sorry, no. Extraordinary power, you know, engravers had the opposite of extraordinary power, in my opinion. Talk to Ruskin. And original form to an engraver would be the drawing on the block or the photograph of the drawing on the block. Whatever it is, it's what's on that block. It's not a drawing on paper necessarily. It's not a sketch. You know, the engraver started here and he ended here, and in the middle is that drawing on paper. His process doesn't end there, okay? And graphic representation, as if artists didn't know how to draw in black and white, and they had to be taught by the engraver. No, I'm afraid not. So I say dubious methodology, dubious conclusion. I want to give you 10 good reasons why. When you look at a drawing in Alice, Tenniel's drawing, that you should regard it as Tenniel's work for the most part, okay? First reason is, well, these writers, where we began, they weren't fools. Ruskin was nobody's fool. He gave a long talk on engraving to Oxford students, where he got his quotes from. If you accept what these modern day scholars are saying, you can't reconcile their world with this world. You can't. And you almost have to accept that it's a conspiracy theory, one that they kept away from Ruskin, who they must have laughed at. And this is an engraver telling us things that conflict with these modern day scholars. Also, the word facsimile, it means, as August will tell you, to make the same in Latin. And it's the word that the Victorians did use. And read these on your own when you get a chance. They confirm the writings of Ruskin, Holiday, and Linton. I've given you process evidence. Yes, you can see little changes here and there, right? Did it really matter? Was it really a big deal? Were they setting out to make improvements? Was it imaginative interpretation? You know, I don't see imaginative interpretation. I don't see, do we see a whole different look? I think that's a stretch. Photos of blocks before cutting. I gave you this evidence. Okay, you have to be careful with it. Artist comments on proofs. When you read these comments on proofs, if you put your mind in the modern day scholar's world, where all this change was imaginative interpretation, all this whole different look was taking place, the comments these artists make on the proofs, complaining to the engravers, don't make any sense. Here is a list of, it's just a few I gathered from referring to the drawing and saying to the engraver, you screwed up my drawing. You know, they're not accepting any changes. These are from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I saw many proofs, not just Tenniel's. Letters. Tenniel wrote an angry letter to Swain. I know he's angry because he underlined 4 words in 4 sentences. The letter was 4 sentences long. In the last sentence, it reads, I wish you would not make alterations without at least consulting me. And he was very angry. And what is he angry about? He's angry about this line from there to there. That closing of the rowlock. That made him livid. Imagine if they tried to change anything else and the whole different look of it. Engraving manuals, they tell you to cut around the lines, they tell you to cut around the lines and cut around the lines. They all have their image of doing that. There's another one of a boat. I read about 6 manuals. Uncut wood blocks. They scream that they don't suggest that these artists needed help. They didn't know how to put modeling on cheeks. Look how beautiful this is. This is by Sandus, by the way. Look how beautiful it is. The man knew how to draw. He's not asking for criticism from engravers, okay? Look at this. This is Tenniel, okay? They're just gonna cut around the lines. They're not even interested in improving it, saying this is too long or something. They just wanna cut it out, make their money, and go home and feed their family. They're not interested in anything else. Simultaneous block cutting. I'm going to let that one hang. I think you know what I'm getting at there. Engravers' ignorance of manuscripts. Did engravers get the manuscript? I don't think so. I never heard of such a thing. When they see a bunny they see a bunny here, it's just a bunny. They don't know this is a white rabbit with a capital W, capital R, maybe. When Tenniel draws a solid waistcoat here and he draws a checked waistcoat here, it's his mistake. This is John Tenniel making a mistake. The engraver wouldn't know if this took place an hour later, a week later, a month later, or a year later. He can never make such a change. He doesn't know anything. Now, if you noticed, I'm a bit angry. Why am I so up in arms about this? Why am I pulling my hair out over this? Right? Well, it is important to understand an artist's true skill, I think. They write books about this, about other Rembrandt and whatnot. Vermeer. I could talk about Vermeer. And it's important to know his actual achievements. Who did what, whether it's forgeries or not. Okay? And this has been taken away from Tenniel by his own biographer. Directly, right? And indirectly, it's been taken away from him by scholars even this decade as we talk. And, well, it's Tenniel's bicentennial this year, right? He was born in 1820, February 28th. And why not give him a gift, I thought. And my gift to him will be his own gift back to him. He was a talented man. He's responsible for the pose of Tweedledum here. He's responsible for the lines and the shading for the most part, for the greater part. He's responsible for Alice's pose and her design and all the shading about it. And I want to be perfectly clear as well. He's responsible for every detail of the background. Every detail of that background. That leaf, he drew it exactly that. Odds are he drew it like that, with this little one coming out a little more than that one. And this squiggly line, odds are he drew that exactly like that. And I can say that. And now I think you can say that. And we can say that. And if anyone gives us any flack about it, all we have to do is direct them to the Blip.
It's really good, actually.